The moment everything changed. There are moments in life that arrive quietly. No thunder. No flashing lights. No dramatic music in the background. Just a single realization that changes everything. Your soulmate had always believed they understood you. They thought they knew why you smiled at certain things, why your eyes softened whenever they spoke, and why your silence sometimes felt louder than words. For the longest time, they convinced themselves that your kindness was simply part of who you were. After all, you were kind to everyone. Or at least, that was what they told themselves. They never allowed their thoughts to wander too far beyond friendship. It felt safer that way. Easier. They built invisible walls around their heart and filled the empty spaces with logic. Maybe I'm imagining it. They don't feel that way. If they cared, they would have said something. Those thoughts became familiar companions. And yet, there were signs. They remembered the way you always noticed when they were having a difficult day before anyone else did. You never asked too many questions. Instead, you would simply stay. Sometimes that meant sitting beside them in comfortable silence. Other times, it meant saying exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment. You remembered little details no one else cared enough to remember. Their favorite song. The story behind their childhood dream. The date they once mentioned as being particularly difficult. The way they preferred their coffee. The books they pretended not to like but secretly loved. Small things. Insignificant things. Except they weren't insignificant at all. Love often hides in the smallest places. One evening, while going through old conversations, your soulmate stumbled upon a message you had sent years ago. It wasn't extraordinary. I know things feel heavy right now, but I hope tomorrow is kinder to you. You deserve good things, even on the days you don't believe it yourself. They stared at those words for a long time. Years had passed since that message was sent. Years. And somehow, you had never stopped saying things like that. There were hundreds of moments scattered across time like stars across the night sky. Every birthday message. Every, "Did you get home safely?" Every, "I saw this and thought of you." Every time you stayed when everyone else left. Suddenly, it felt impossible not to see it. Their hearts sank and soared at the same time. Because for the first time, they weren't asking themselves whether you cared. They were asking themselves a much more frightening question. How long have you loved them? The answer terrified them. Maybe longer than either of you realized. That night, sleep refused to come. Your soulmate replayed every memory they had tried so hard to ignore. The way your face lit up whenever they entered a room. The hesitation in your voice whenever conversations became too personal. The sadness hidden behind your smile whenever they talked about moving away someday. The countless moments they had dismissed because accepting them felt too dangerous. Suddenly, the pieces began fitting together. And once you see the truth, you cannot unsee it. They found themselves wondering about all the things left unsaid. How many times had you almost confessed? How many messages had you typed and deleted? How many nights had you spent wondering if they would ever understand? For the first time, they allowed themselves to imagine what it must have felt like to carry feelings that deep while expecting nothing in return. The thought broke something inside them. Not because they pitied you, but because they realized how blind they had been. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, their thoughts became impossible to silence. They thought about the way you always celebrated their successes as if they were your own. They thought about the times you defended them when they weren't there. They thought about every version of themselves you had loved, especially the versions they struggled to love themselves. And then, another realization arrived. It wasn't gentle. It crashed into them all at once. The reason your feelings had remained hidden for so long wasn't because you were afraid. It was because your love had never been about possession. You never tried to force your way into their life. You never demanded answers. You never asked them to choose you. You simply loved them. Quietly. Patiently. Completely. For reasons they still couldn't understand. Their chest tightened. Because people don't love like that anymore. Not without expecting something in return. Not without conditions. And yet, you did. Hours passed. The clock on the wall continued its steady rhythm, indifferent to the storm unfolding inside their heart. By midnight, one thought had become impossible to ignore. What if I've been thinking about them all this time too? The question lingered. Dangerous. Unavoidable. They remembered every time your name appeared on their phone and their mood instantly improved. Every time they experienced something beautiful and wished you were there to see it. Every time life became overwhelming and you were the first person they wanted to talk to. Maybe this wasn't a one-sided story after all. Maybe they had simply been afraid to acknowledge their own feelings. Because admitting the truth would mean admitting something else. That somewhere along the way, you had become home. And homes are terrifying things. People spend their entire lives searching for them. Some never find them at all. The thought followed them into the early hours of the morning. By sunrise, your soulmate knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing would ever feel the same again. Because now they knew. They knew about the love hidden between your words. They knew about the feelings carefully tucked away behind every smile. The following days were unlike anything your soulmate had ever experienced. They tried to continue life as if nothing had changed. They woke up at the usual time. They answered messages. They attended meetings, completed responsibilities, and smiled when people expected them to smile. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. No matter what they were doing, their thoughts always found their way back to you. It started with little things. While making breakfast, they remembered how you once laughed at their terrible cooking skills. While listening to music during the drive home, they heard a lyric that reminded them of a conversation the two of you had shared years ago. While passing a bookstore, they remembered the novel you had recommended countless times, insisting they would love it if they ever gave it a chance. It was as if the entire world had quietly become filled with reminders of you. And the more they noticed, the more impossible it became to ignore the truth. You had always been there. In every important memory. In every difficult season. In every victory they celebrated. How had they never realized it before? One afternoon, while cleaning out an old drawer, they discovered a small collection of things they had unconsciously kept over the years. A birthday card you had written. A photograph from years ago. A movie ticket from a day neither of you had planned but both had ended up enjoying. And tucked between the pages of an old notebook was a handwritten note. Don't forget to believe in yourself today. The world is better with you in it. They stared at the words in disbelief. Why had they kept this? The answer came immediately. Because some part of them had always known you were important. Their fingers traced the edges of the paper carefully, as though it were something fragile. Memories returned one after another. The first time you met. The first real conversation. The first time they caught themselves smiling after receiving one of your messages. The first time they realized your opinion mattered more than anyone else's. The signs had been there all along. They simply hadn't been brave enough to see them. That evening, they opened your conversation again. There were years of messages. Thousands of words exchanged between two people who had somehow built an entire world together without ever acknowledging it. They began scrolling. A message from 3 years ago. Please promise me you'll take care of yourself this week. Another. You don't have to carry everything alone, you know. And another. I hope something unexpectedly wonderful happens to you today. Their chest tightened. Who says things like that? Who continues to care so deeply without asking for anything in return? You did. Always you. For a moment, they imagined what would happen if they told you they finally understood. Would you believe them? Or had too much time passed? The thought frightened them. Because people change. Life changes people. What if you had spent years waiting before eventually teaching yourself not to? What if you had finally moved on? What if your heart belonged somewhere else now? The possibility hurt more than they expected. And that realization was perhaps the clearest answer of all. They were jealous. Not of a specific person. But of anyone who might someday become the center of your world. That thought lingered long after they tried pushing it away. Late that night, unable to sleep, they found themselves opening your social media profile. It felt ridiculous. They weren't the kind of person who did things like this. And yet, there they were, staring at pictures they had seen before but somehow seeing them differently now. They noticed the happiness in your smile. The kindness in your eyes. The quiet strength that had always drawn people toward you. And suddenly, they understood something else. You had spent years seeing the best in them. But had anyone spent years seeing the best in you? Had anyone ever told you how extraordinary you truly were? Had anyone ever loved you with the same patience you offered so freely to others? The thought made their heart ache. Because if the answer was no, then the world had been incredibly unfair to you. For the first time in a very long while, they allowed themselves to ask a question they had avoided for years. What would life look like if I chose them? The image appeared effortlessly. Peaceful mornings. Long conversations. Shared laughter. A life built not on grand gestures, but on countless small moments. And perhaps that was what frightened them most. It felt right. Too right. As if some part of their soul had been waiting for this realization long before their mind could understand it. The next morning, they received a message from you. Simple. Ordinary. Good morning. I hope today is kind to you. They read it once. Then twice. Then a third time. You had no idea. No idea that your words now carried an entirely different meaning. No idea that the person reading them was no longer the same person they had been a week ago. Their fingers hovered over the keyboard. They wanted to say something meaningful. Something honest. Something that could somehow explain the storm unfolding inside their heart. Instead, they replied, "Thank you. I hope today is kind to you too." They stared at the message after sending it. It felt inadequate. Insufficient. How could a single sentence possibly communicate everything they were feeling? How could they explain that they had spent days thinking about you? That every memory suddenly carried new meaning? That they were beginning to suspect their heart had belonged to you for far longer than they cared to admit? They couldn't. Not yet. Because realization and courage are not the same thing. One arrives quickly. The other takes time. Still, something had changed. Later that evening, while watching the sunset, they caught themselves reaching for their phone. Not to check social media. Not to answer emails. But to send you a picture of the sky. They stopped halfway. Then smiled. Because this, too, wasn't new. You had always been the person they wanted to share beautiful things with. They simply hadn't understood why. Until now. As darkness settled across the horizon, one truth became impossible to deny. They had spent years believing you were the one who couldn't stop thinking about them. And perhaps that had once been true. But now? Now the universe had quietly reversed the roles. Because every thought led back to you. Every memory carried your name. Every future they imagined somehow included your smile. And for the first time in their life, they found themselves hoping for something they had never dared to hope for before. That maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. Somewhere, under the same night sky, you were living your life completely unaware that the person you had loved so quietly for so long was finally beginning to understand. And understanding, once it arrives, has a way of changing everything. By the time they finally fell asleep that night, one thought remained. Tomorrow, they would hear your voice. They didn't know why. They just knew they needed to. Because missing someone before they are yours is a very strange kind of feeling. The next morning, your soulmate woke up earlier than usual. For a few moments, everything felt normal. Then they remembered. You. It had become a pattern over the past several days. Before their feet touched the floor, before the responsibilities of the day settled on their shoulders, there was always the same thought waiting for them. I wonder how they're doing today. The realization still felt strange. Not because they cared, that had always been true. But because they were finally allowing themselves to admit just how much. They spent the morning distracted, glancing at their phone more times than they cared to admit. They considered sending you a message at least 6 different times. Each attempt ended the same way. Typing. Deleting. Overthinking. It was ridiculous. This was you. The person they had spoken to thousands of times. The person who knew their favorite memories, their worst fears, and all the versions of themselves they rarely showed anyone else. And yet, somehow, talking to you suddenly felt different. More significant. By the afternoon, they finally gave up pretending they weren't waiting for an excuse to reach out. Fate, however, seemed to have other plans. Their phone lit up. Your name appeared on the screen. For one brief, impossible moment, their heart forgot how to beat. It was a call. Not a message. A call. They stared at it for 2 rings, suddenly aware of how nervous they felt. Nervous. When had that started happening? Taking a deep breath, they answered. Hello? And then they heard it. Your voice. It was familiar in the way certain songs are familiar. The kind that instantly transport you back to another time, another place, another version of yourself. Hey, you said softly. Am I calling at a bad time? No, they answered a little too quickly. Not at all. A small laugh escaped your lips. It was amazing, they thought, how something so simple could make their entire day feel lighter. I just wanted to check on you, you said. You seemed a little distant lately. Of course you noticed. You always noticed. There was a pause before they replied. I've just been thinking about a lot of things. They weren't lying. If anything, it was the understatement of a lifetime. I know that feeling, you said gently. The conversation continued as it always had. You talked about your day. They talked about theirs. You laughed about something insignificant. They found themselves smiling at things that weren't even particularly funny. And throughout the entire conversation, one thought refused to leave them alone. How did I go this long without realizing how much I love hearing their voice? It wasn't just the sound of it. It was the comfort. The familiarity. The way it somehow made the world feel quieter. At one point, you became distracted and began absent-mindedly talking about something you had recently become interested in. Normally, they might have teased you for speaking so passionately about such a random topic. Instead, they found themselves listening with an attention that surprised even them. Because when people love someone, they don't just listen to their words. They listen to the spaces between them. You still there? You asked after a moment. Yeah. You're unusually quiet today. If only you knew. I'm just listening. There was another brief silence. Then, quietly, you said, you've always been good at that. The words stayed with them long after you said them. You've always been good at that. Had they? Because lately, all they could think about were the things they had failed to hear. All the confessions hidden inside ordinary conversations. All the love disguised as concern. All the moments when your heart had spoken while your words remained careful. As the call continued, they realized something else. No matter how many years passed, talking to you never felt forced. There was no need to pretend. No need to impress. You had somehow created a space where they could simply exist. And perhaps that was why losing you suddenly felt unimaginable. The thought arrived unexpectedly. What if one day they're gone? What if life took you somewhere else? What if you met someone who recognized your worth immediately? What if someday your messages stopped appearing? Their chest tightened. They didn't like how much those possibilities hurt. Eventually, the conversation began winding down. I should let you go, you said. You've probably got things to do. They almost said, stay. The word sat at the edge of their lips before reason pulled it back. Yeah, they managed. I guess I do. There was a brief silence. Then you said something that would replay in their mind for the rest of the evening. I'm glad I called. 3 simple words. And yet, they carried an unbearable amount of meaning. Me too, they replied quietly. After the call ended, they remained sitting exactly where they were. The room was silent now. But somehow, it still felt filled with you. They replayed the conversation in their mind. Your laugh. Your concern. The softness in your voice when you asked if they were okay. It was absurd. One phone call should not have the power to affect someone this much. And yet, there they were. Smiling at absolutely nothing. That evening, a friend noticed their unusual behavior. You seem happy, they remarked casually. Your soulmate hesitated. Happy wasn't the right word. Hopeful, perhaps. Terrified. Confused. Alive. It's complicated, they finally said. Their friend laughed. That usually means there's a person involved. For the first time, they didn't deny it. Later that night, they found themselves staring out the window, remembering something you had once told them years ago. The right people never make you feel like you have to earn their presence. At the time, they had simply nodded. Now, they understood. Because you had spent years proving those words true. You had stayed through difficult seasons. Through distance. Through misunderstandings. Through time itself. And somehow, despite everything, you were still here. Still calling. Still caring. Still choosing them. The question was no longer whether you loved them. That answer had become painfully obvious. The real question was this. Would you still choose them if you knew they were only now beginning to understand what your heart had been trying to tell them all along? They didn't know. But for the first time in years, they wanted to find out.